Seal against life. In the course of time, we need to become channels for this practice of work on self. If we can pass it on as taught, we then acquire something in return. In order to do that, however, something must be sealed within us, sealed tight against the effect of other influences and phenomena acting outside of us in a material world. This work must be given space within, where eventually nothing of the subjective can affect it. Our work must develop and grow, as a new being forming in oneself, Agni, the priest of the call. We have to protect that being and fight for it often, against the logic of our external senses. Our foot represents the material, which touches the surface of life. We can now speak of what the eyes mean, in contrast with a foot. Briefly, our eyes mean esoterically, an inner psychological understanding, as distinct from any understanding that we might gain from all 5 external senses, or one's foot. It is often said in the work that we have to go against life, for example, scrolling our news feeds or blogs, checking email and social media, seeing how everyone in the world seems to be angry or violent against something, which might tempt us to reason, what is the good of any work if everything is going in this way? Such a thought would obviously mean that we have not sealed the work from influences of everyday life. We are letting our attitude to work become commingled with things belonging to the great machinery of life, just as if we'd expect external life to correspond with or conform to the laws of work. This sealing of oneself from life, so that we can guard and keep separate work ideas, is necessary. It has to be done sooner rather than later, because all work falls under laws other than whatever it is that life has to offer, because its source is from a different direction. If we judge this work by what happens in life, then we cannot understand it, as here in the work we are studying something quite different from everyday run-of-the-mill experience. We seek to come under influences different from the influences of material life, to form something within ourselves that life cannot shake, whatever happens in the day, whether war or peace, poverty or wealth, bad weather or good weather, failure or success. The idea is that we have to form in ourselves a place where the work exists, and then have to guard that place fiercely. The work teaches that everything happens in life in the only way that it can possibly happen. So don't take any of it personally, because it just is, and it does in accordance with the law of outcomes. Life is a grand mechanism, and all organic life on Earth serves a particular cosmic purpose, defined by the ray of creation. That sensitive living film of material that surrounds the Earth is used for a deliberate mechanical function. However, there is a chance for us, as individuals, to disconnect ourselves from at least some of the mechanical laws of life, and begin to grow through more conscious laws. That is free will, and the power of choice, which can adapt and transform our fate. When we take this standpoint, the non-correspondence of life with our expectations no longer becomes a source of negativity and stress. We anticipate less, and are disappointed, or become negative less frequently, quite simply because we know and understand, we get it, and so no longer fuss. If we sustain ourselves sufficiently on the ideas of this work, we are able to guard that inner place, the sanctum sanctorum within us. Then events that formerly dragged us down into negative states no longer have that power over us, because we begin to have the power of the work within us. Do not try to find the will of God in life. The Lord's Prayer begins with the idea that God's will is not done on this earth, but may be done for us. Make shoes for yourself from the leather that the work has to offer, because our life shoes wear out. Unfortunately, in certain cases, some people seem satisfied with their life shoes. An ancient teaching on esotericism was offered by Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, and from this arose the term hermetically sealed, which is used in esoteric alchemy. Esoteric alchemy is based upon the idea that mankind, as base metal, can be transformed into gold, i.e., man can be taught, and then practice, how to become as the purest of gold that lies waiting patiently within. This is esoteric alchemy. Exoteric alchemy was shrouded in the idea that actual lead could be turned into gold, which is of course not possible. A hermit was an individual who followed the teachings of Hermes, then sought to seal themselves off from the effects of life by going into a cave or desert. In the Caucasus, George Gurdjieff spoke of monks that were sealed alive into walls, then fed through cavities by the faithful. This is not the idea of the work, as it would be getting rid of life artificially. Exactly the forms of austericism that Shakyamuni Buddha taught against. In his book Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, Gurdjieff described this particular sect found near a settlement he called Syncretotsa. For a better understanding of what follows, you will need to know the principal cause of the schism found among these sectarians. It turned out that the leaders of the sect, while they were still in Pearl Land, had pledged themselves to withdraw completely from beings like themselves, and to stop at nothing in order to attain liberation from the consequences of the properties of that organ of which the divine teacher St. Buddha had spoken. Their pledge committed them to exist in a certain way, until their planetary bodies were completely destroyed, in other words, until their death, and the purpose of this special form of existence was to purify what they called their souls of all the alien deposits, due to that organ kunda buffer, which, as St. Buddha had told them, their ancestors had once possessed. And having freed themselves from these consequences, they would acquire the possibility, as the divine teacher had also explained, of re-blending with the all-embracing holy prana. But when they had settled down, and begun to put into practice this special form of suffering, and their wives on learning its true nature had rebelled, many of the sectarians, under the influence of their wives, declined to carry out the obligations they had assumed in Pearl Land. And as a result, they split up into two independent parties. From then on, these sectarians, formerly called the self-tamers, began to be known by different names. Those who remained faithful to the obligations they had taken upon themselves were called Orthodox Haiduraki, while those that had renounced certain of the obligations assumed in their native land were called Katoshki Haiduraki. At the time of our arrival in Syncretotsa, the sectarians named Orthodox Haiduraki had established not far from their original settlement a well-organized monastery where their special form of suffering was put into practice. The next day, on resuming our journey after a restful night, we passed very near this monastery of the Orthodox Haiduraki sect of the Buddhist religion. And as it was the hour of day when we usually made a halt to feed our quadruped workers, we asked the monks to allow us to stop for a while in the shelter of their monastery. Strange and unusual as it may seem, these beings who bore the name of monk did not refuse our objectively just request, but admitted us at once, without any of the swaggering that has become proper there throughout the centuries, to monks of all doctrines. Thereupon we unexpectedly found ourselves in the holy of holies of their doctrine. Just that sphere which the beings of this planet Earth, from the very beginning, have been so ingenious in hiding from observations. In other words, they become so skillful at wiseacring and making a mystery of something, and then so thoroughly concealing that mystery by all manner of means, that even beings with pure reason cannot penetrate to the heart of it all. The monastery of the Orthodox Haiduraki sect of the Buddhist religion occupied a large square surrounded by a massive wall, which protected those within from beings of their own kind and from wild creatures. In the center of this vast walled enclosure stood a large solidly built structure that formed the main part of the monastery. In one half of the building the monks carried on their ordinary being existence, and in the other they practiced those manipulations that were the special feature of the belief of their sect, but which to outsiders were arcana. Along the inner side of the encircling wall, and built solidly into the wall itself, was a row of small cell-like compartments, set close together. And it was precisely in the nature of these cell-like structures that lay the difference between this monastery and monasteries in general of the planet Earth. The sentry box structures were entirely walled in on all sides, except for a small opening near the bottom, through which with great difficulty a hand could be thrust. It was within these cells that the deserving members of the sect were to be perpetually immured. and there to occupy themselves with certain manipulations of what they called their emotions and thoughts, until the total destruction of their planetary existence was achieved. And it was when the wives of these sectarians, known as self-tamers, found out about all of this, that they raised a great outcry. In the religious teaching of this sect, there was a full explanation of just what manipulations had to be practiced on oneself, and for how long, in order ultimately to merit being immured into one of those cells, there to receive once every 24 hours, a piece of bread and a small jug of water. When we were admitted within the walls of that terrible monastery, every one of these monstrous cells was occupied, and the care of the immured, that is, giving them once every 24 hours, through the tiny opening, a piece of bread and a small jug of water, was undertaken with great reverence by other sectarians, themselves candidates for immurement, who, while awaiting their turn, existed in the large building at the center of the monastery square. Their immured favorites did indeed remain in those monstrous sepulchres, until their motionless and half-starved existence, so filled with deprivation, came to an end. As soon as the companions of the immured learned that one of them had ceased to exist, their planetary body was removed from the improvised sepulchre, and at once, in place of that being who had thus destroyed themselves, another unfortunate fanatic of that maleficent religious teaching was walled up. And the ranks of these fanatical monks were always being filled with other members of that peculiar sect constantly coming from Pearl Land. In Pearl Land itself, all the adherents of that sect already knew of the existence of this specially convenient place for accomplishing the crowning act of their religious doctrine, which was supposedly based upon the exact instructions of Saint Buddha. And in every large center, they even had what are called agents to help them to get there. Having rested and fed our biped and quadruped workers, we left behind us that melancholy place of sacrifice to the wretched organ which, according to the ruminations of certain most high cosmic individuals, for some reason or other, had to be implanted in the presence of the former three-brained beings of that ill-fated place. We have to seal ourselves from the effects of external life, when and as they are actually happening to us, not literally but figuratively, without allowing things to overwhelm us, driving our emotions down in a torrent of negativity and suicidal thought. Here comes the idea of practical non-identifying. With what are we identified at this moment? Of course, without self-observation we have no idea. Without it one is simply identified. Our state remains in darkness, and is not brought into consciousness. In general, when such is the case, in many instances we are not making an effort to separate ourselves from the effects of external life, and so there is nothing whatsoever sealed within us. Such a person is not living consciously, so how could we claim therefore that they are working? They will not recognize that they are behaving in this way unless they allow light into their inner darkness, and then observe their state. When we do not know how we behave, all of this is dark to us. We are doing it all the time, but do not know that we are doing it. Which is the strangest thing, because we are not conscious. We are asleep to ourselves, and it would be correct in this case to say that this person is a machine, an automaton behaving purely mechanically. In a machine, of course, nothing is sealed, nothing is made tight against the impact of external forces. It's turned by life, as any machine is turned by a belt, a chain or a drive shaft. Each one of us must become a channel for the teaching of this work. To become a channel in a sense that our work must be sealed off from life, otherwise life will keep changing us. So one must never put their hand on the mud of their feet, then bring it up to their eyes, hence the allegory in the New Testament on the washing of feet. An understanding of life is one thing, and the understanding of this work is another thing. Life must not prevail over or stand higher than this work. Anyone in the work is someone who, in spite of external circumstances, whether they are helpful or not, continues to work. Life ought not shake our understanding of work. Our eyesight, which in this case means insight, should maintain us. Esoterically, there are two kinds of blindness. There are the blind people whom Christ healed, people who are blind internally, and come to see the light. Then there are those who have had their inner sight awakened, and now become blind to the effects of external sense-driven life. We know that we can take a thing from a life point of view, and then we can take that same thing from a work point of view. When one takes something as work, the result is obviously quite different. There is a higher level of understanding above that upon which one's feet rest. On this level, we realize that everything that happens to us in life is the best thing that could possibly happen, if we take it as a work opportunity, as a means of development. As opposed to fighting things through buffers, so as to remain comfortably asleep. We realize in a practical way how we are created a self-developing organism. We no longer take life as an end in itself, or expect it to be as we wish for, but take it instead as a means to an end. As a vehicle, vahan, to get us somewhere that we need to be. To an intelligent person, neither life in general nor one's own life can be understood in terms simply of itself, and an additional perspective is necessary. Reflect upon this when you are embroiled in life difficulties and glimpse, through reflection, that things might just be what you need right now, in order to make some much-needed changes in your life. In ancient myths, esoteric ideas and concepts were introduced in the form of allegories, which, if taken literally, seem utter nonsense, but, if taken psychologically, have much deeper meaning. Remember when Odysseus landed on the island of Circe, he was given by Hermes a magical herb, which protected him against her enchantment, although his companions were turned into swine by her spells. Was this an actual herb? Maybe, perhaps aconite. However, this work, if it were really taken into oneself, would begin to have the exact same effect. It would protect us from the enchantments of life, from all illusions, from its mirrors and reflections. Remember the work myth, that we are all in a hall of mirrors. In it, everyone is rushing, as they think, straight ahead, toward progress. But owing to the mirrors constantly changing their perspective, we are simply going round and around in a repeating circle. An individual may already feel something of this, in recalling the cycles of their lifetime. We might eventually comprehend that we are tricked by life itself, and not blame any people, events, circumstances or things that we find ourselves surrounded by each day. Without the ideas of any work being practiced on the self, we have no way of understanding this inkling or suspicion. An individual who had recently joined the work noted they had the impression when returning from some entertainment or social function that they had been tricked. Not by the entertainment or by their hostess, but by something that they only sensed dimly, something that was always present within them. Some power that made them feel rather a fool, seeming to use them for purposes of its own, and yet not malevolent so much as businesslike or practical, but acting for its own purposes amongst people who are foolish enough to let themselves be hypnotized by it. This is an individual who is beginning to have traces of magnetic center. They feel in some way that they are being used by a power which we cannot resist, but which is deceiving everyone. If someone begins to feel that life is tricking them, if they begin to sense this hall of mirrors, then they are already beginning to reach a stage in which the work and its ideas could prove useful to them. They might understand that life, indeed their own life, cannot be understood in terms of themselves, but requires some other interpretation. So this work could become useful to such an individual. H.P. Blavatsky notes in her publication, The Secret Doctrine, on the Mysteries of Osiris, that a Mr. Staniland Wake writes on page 93 of his paper, The Origin and Significance of the Great Pyramid. Quote, the so-called King's Chamber, of which an enthusiastic pyramidist notes, the polished walls, fine materials, grand proportions and exalted place, eloquently tell of glories yet to come. If not, then the chamber of perfections of Cheop's tomb was probably the place to which an initiate was admitted after they had passed through the narrow upward passage of the Grand Gallery, with its lowly termination, that gradually prepared them for the final stage of the sacred mysteries. It is a most singular thing, because, at the entrance passage to the king's chamber, the measurement from the surface of the great step and the grand gallery to the top of the said is by the very careful measurement of Piazzi Smythe, 339 inches. Take A as a center, and with this radius describe a circle. The diameter of that circle will be 339 multiplied by 2, which equals 678. These numbers are those of the expression of the raven, in the dove and raven scenes depicting Noah's flood. The radius is taken to show division into two parts, which are 1065 each, for 113, representing man, multiplies by 6, and is equal to 678. And the diameter to a circumference of 1065 multiplied by 2. So we have here an indication of cosmic man, on this high grade or step, at the entrance to the king's chamber, which is the Holy of Holies, and symbolizes the womb. The passage is of such a height that for someone to enter, they must stoop. But a man upright is 113, and broken or stooping becomes 113 divided by 2, which equals 5.65, and then 5.65 multiplied by 10 represents Jehovah. That is, he personifies Jehovah as entering the Holy of Holies. In Hebrew esotericism, the chief function of Jehovah was child-giving and fecundity. Because by the numbers of his name he was the measure of the lunar year, which was their cycle of time. Because by its factor of 7 it ran coordinating the periods of the quickening, viability and gestation of humanity. It was taken as the causality of the generative action, and therefore worshipped and besought. Had Mr. Staniland Wake been a theosophist, he might have added that the narrow upward passage leading to the king's chamber had a narrow gate, indeed the same strait gate which leadeth unto life. Or the new spiritual rebirth alluded to by Jesus in Matthew chapter 7 verse 13. And that it is this gate in the initiation temple that the writer who recorded the words, alleged to have been spoken by an initiate, was thinking of. What Blavatsky wrote of previously in Isis Unveiled can be found in the Egyptian Mystery, or the Source of Measures, by those readings of the Bible with their numerical and geometric keys. In the Kabbalah this circle, with its diameter line, is the picture of the 10 Sephiroth or emanations, composing the Adam Kadmon, or archetypal man, the creative origin of all things. This idea of connecting the circle and its diameter line, that is number 10, with a symbol of reproduction and the most holy place, was carried out in the construction of the king's chamber, or Holy of Holies in the Great Pyramid, in the Tabernacle of Moses, and in the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Solomon. It is the picture of a double womb, for in Hebrew the letter He is at the same time the number 5, the 5th letter of the Semitic abjads, and symbol of the womb. Twice 5 is 10. The king's chamber in Cheops pyramid is therefore an Egyptian Holy of Holies. On the days of the mysteries of initiation, the candidate, representing the solar god, had to descend into the sarcophagus and represent the energizing ray, entering into the fecund womb of nature. So it is, but the spirit of it has always been misunderstood. To crucify before, not against the sun, is a phrase used of initiation. It comes from Egypt, and primarily from the Aryans of India. This enigma can be unriddled only by searching for its key in the mysteries of initiation. The adept initiate, who had successfully passed through all trials, was attached, not nailed, but simply tied on a bench in the form of a tau in Egypt, of a swastika from Sanskrit, without the 4 additional prolongations. Thereafter the initiate was plunged into a deep sleep, the sleep of Siloam, as it is called to this day, among the initiates of Asia Minor, Syria, and even in Higher Egypt. They were allowed to remain in this state for 3 days and 3 nights, during which time their spiritual ego was said to confabulate with the gods, descend into Hades, Amenti or Patala, according to the origin myth, and do works of charity to the invisible beings, whether souls of men or elemental spirits, their body remaining all the while in a temple crypt or subterranean cave. In Egypt it was placed in the sarcophagus of the king's chamber in the pyramid of Cheops. then carried during the night of the approaching third day to the entrance of a gallery, where at a certain hour the beams of the rising sun struck full on the face of the entranced candidate, who awoke to be initiated by Osiris and Thoth, the god of wisdom. Emerging on the following morning, the initiate typified resurrection of life after that change called death. In the great mysteries their figurative death lasted 2 days, when with the sun they arose, resurrected, on that third morning, after a last night of the most arduous trials. One glyph, particularly from the Temple of Philo, represents a scene of initiation. 2 god hierophants, one with the head of a hawk, the sun, and the other ibis-headed, Mercury or Thoth, god of wisdom and secret learning, assessor of Osiris' son, are standing over the body of a candidate just initiated. They are in the act of pouring on his head a double stream of water, the water of life and new birth, whose stream is interlaced in the shape of a cross, and full of small unsated crosses. This is allegorical of the awakening of the candidate, now an initiate. When the beams of the morning sun, Osiris, strike the crown of their head, the entranced body, having been placed on its wooden tow, so as to receive the rays, then appeared the hierophant initiators, and the sacramental words were pronounced, ostensibly, to the sun Osiris, addressed in reality to the spirit sun within us, enlightening the newly born. Reflect upon the connection of the sun with the cross in both its generative and spiritually regenerative capacities, from the highest antiquity. Examine the tomb of Beit Oxley in the reign of Ramses II, where one can find the crosses in every shape and position. So again, on the throne of that sovereign, and finally, on a fragment from the Hall of the Ancestors of Thotmès III, preserved in the National Library of Paris, which represents the adoration of Bacchanal. While the postulant represented the sun, the all-vivifying orb that resurrects every morning, simply to impart life to all, the sarcophagus was symbolic of the female principle. This in Egypt, however its form and shape changed with every country, provided it remained a vessel, a symbolic navis or boat-shaped vehicle, and a container, symbolically of germs, seed, or the germ of life. In India, it is the golden cow through which the candidate for Brahmanism has to pass, if they desire to be a Brahmin, and to become Dvija, reborn a second time. The crescent form Aga of the Greeks was the type of the Queen of Heaven, Diana, or the moon. She was the great mother of all existence, as the sun was the father. The Jews, previous to, as well as after their metamorphosis of Jehovah into a male god, worshipped the feminine Ashtoreth, which made Isaiah declare, "Your new moons and feasts my soul hateth." See verse 14, the saying of which was evidently unjust. Ashtoreth and the new moon, the crescent Aga festivals, had no worse significance as a form of public worship than had the hidden meaning of the moon in general, which was Kabbalistically connected directly with, and sacred to Jehovah, as is well known. With the sole difference that one was the female, and the other the male aspect of the moon, and of the star Venus. The sun, father, the moon, mother, and Mercury Thoth, the sun, were the earliest trinity of the Egyptians who personified them in Osiris, Isis, and Thoth, Hermes. In Pistis Sophia, the 7 great gods, divided into 2 triads, and the highest god, sun, are the lower tridunamis, whose powers reside respectively in Mars, Mercury, and Venus, and the higher triad, the 3 unseen gods, who dwell in the moon, Jupiter, and Saturn. See verses 359 and 361. Ashtoreth was in one sense an impersonal symbol of nature, the ship of life carrying throughout the boundless sidereal ocean the germs of all being. And when she was not identified with Venus like every other queen of heaven to whom cakes and buns were offered in sacrifice, Ashtoreth became the reflection of the Chaldean, Nu'a, the universal mother, female Noah, considered as one with the ark, and of the female triad, Anna, Belita, and Davikina, called when blended into one, sovereign goddess, lady of the nether abyss, mother of gods, queen of the earth, and queen of fecundity. Later, Belita, or Damti, the sea, the mother of the city of Erech, the great Chaldean necropolis, became Eve, and now she is Mary the Virgin, in the Latin Church, represented as standing on the crescent moon, and at times on the globe, to vary the program. The navi, or ship-like form of the crescent, which blends in itself all those common symbols of the ship of life, such as Noah's Ark, the yoni of the Hindus, and the Ark of the Covenant, is the female symbol of the universal mothers of the gods, and is now found under its Christian symbol in every church, as the nave, from navis, the ship. The navus, the sidereal vessel, is fructified by the spirit of life, the male god, or as the learned Kenealy, in his Apocalypsis, calls it very appropriately, the Holy Spirit. In Western religious symbology, the crescent was the male, and the full moon, the feminine aspect of that universal spirit. It is this sealing of oneself up, seclusion, a spiritual rebirth of inner being, that is symbolized or allegorized. Not literally, as in the monks of the steppes, but metaphorically, through work and initiation, as with the king's chamber and sarcophagus of the Great Pyramid in Egypt.